So a couple of years ago, I was hanging out with my cousin at his house while we were home alone. I'm not sure how, but we ended up on the topic of ghosts and paranormal stuff we have experienced. I tell a couple little things that have happened to me, but it was nothing big. A couple shadows or doors closing by themselves, typical stuff. All of a sudden, my cousin started to visibly get uncomfortable. He tells me that I have to sleep over if he was to tell me his next story. I was like, okay bro, relax, it's not that deep. Then he starts to cry. Like tears rolling down his face and shaking. That's when I really started to get freaked out. I tell him, okay, I'll sleep over. What is it? He then tells me that when he was about 14, he was hanging out at one of his friend's house in her room. By the end of the night, they were goofing around, taking some selfies and pictures together, and that was it. He went home and didn't think much about it. But then the next day, when he went through his camera roll and looked at the selfies, he realized he caught something in the background. When he showed me these pictures, my heart sank and I felt true fear for the first time in my life. I still get goosebumps thinking about them. These are the pictures he showed me. The pictures were taken in a span of about 5 seconds, being taken back to back. Seeing a ghost picture online and being shown a picture from someone you know and knowing the picture are real made this extremely disturbing for me. A few years ago, my wife and I went on a trip to Europe with another couple. One of the towns we stayed in for a couple of days was Firenze. The fair city of Firenze is a subject for multiple books with its art, architecture, beauty, and history, so I will not get into that here. If you are fortunate enough to have been there, you will know what I am talking about. You would also know that you cannot take a step in the city without being a stone's throw away from something historic. And all that history is bound to have its fair share of paranormal history attached. On our first night in the historic part of town, we stayed in one of the few modern hotels. This place had been completely built as a new structure, so there was nothing historic about it. But it did have a striking view of the Duomo. We could only stay there one night due to room availability, but the staff was kind enough to book us a room in a hotel that was a few streets away. We walked over to the place, and it was this charming chateau looking building, and it looked very, very old. We could not check in yet, thus we asked the front desk to store our luggage so we can go sightseeing. While my friend was taking care of that, I walked around the lobby, which had an interesting display of art, items, and pictures from the hotel's history. A quick browse of the display, and I found that the hotel had a rich history indeed. Then it had been a convent, a hospital, an insane asylum, and a hospital again, and now a hotel. I've seen enough horror films to know that this is the premise where you know bad stuff is going to happen, and you tell the characters to turn around and leave. However, I shrugged it off and decided not to tell my wife, who freaks out about things like that. We had a wonderful day and evening. We retired to our room, which was nice by the way, and promptly fell asleep. I woke up around dawn, since I am a light sleeper and an early riser, and I could tell it was dawn because sunlight was trickling in from the edges of the window curtains. The room's window was at the very center of the wall, and from its left edge, there was around 5 feet of wall until the wall met the corner, where a floor-to-ceiling dresser stood. My wife normally sleeps later than I do, so when I wake up, I stay in bed for a while thinking about the upcoming day and anything and everything. That is when I saw her. At the corner of the wall, between the window and the dresser, about a foot off the ground, there was a lady, dressed in all white, floating in the air. She was not translucent, but she was not completely solid either. It is hard to describe her appearance. However, I could see her facial features. I could tell she had light hair and very fair skin. Her expression was truly kind and calming, with a warm, tender smile. There was no exchange of words, no movement or gestures, and no telepathic messages. We remained there for a while, just staring at each other. It is important to mention that at no point I felt threatened or scared. Freaked out, definitely. My wife began steering in bed next to me and eventually put her arm across my chest and began making light, half-sleep conversation. I did not break eye contact with the entity at all and began smiling back at her, just one of those comfortable, sincere smiles. As my wife became more active, I said to her, "Don't look, but there is a woman in her room. She's floating. I think she's a ghost." My wife opened her eyes wide, all the mind fogginess running from her head. She stared at me for a few seconds, and then out of the corner of my eye, I could tell that she shut her eyes in and I don't want to look away. A few moments after that, the lady moved backwards and faded into the wall. She did not say goodbye or change her expression. She just left. I told my wife she could look now, but she did not want to. I could tell she was praying. We went down for breakfast and told our friends the story, which they of course did not believe. I went to the front desk and told the person there what I had seen, and she asked me if I wanted to fill out a form about it. Apparently, it was not uncommon, but the experiences and the guests' reactions were very wide-ranging, and they had figured over the years that most guests just wanted someone to listen to them, so they instituted the form so people would not talk about the encounters around other guests and just write them down. I chose not to write anything. To this day, I clearly remember the fondness of the smile of the Lady of Firenze. I would like to thank her for reaching out to me and being so kind. Good evening. My name is Alicia, and I've been seeing things since before I can even remember. My first encounter I can remember was when I was 4 and we lived in Wakaskiwin, Alberta. It was late one night. I woke up and my parents were having a small party in the living room. We had just moved in and didn't even have furniture yet, so everyone was sitting on the floor. I woke up and found my mom and sat with her. I was always scared to use the bathroom by myself, my mom said, so I was bugging her to come with me. She was busy talking with her friends, so she told me to go by myself, and she said she will watch me from where she was sitting, and she will make sure nobody goes in the washroom. I agreed. I really had to go. I remember sitting there in the washroom when all of a sudden, these little girls, older than me, black hair up to their shoulders, comes from the bedroom area and stands in the hallway right where I can see her, and I immediately thought it was my sister Rachel, so I began to ask her, "Where did you come from? When did you get here? I thought you were in Saskatchewan," but she didn't respond. She just stares at me with this little grin on her face. Again, I ask her, "When did you get here? Does Mom know you're here?" Nothing. I began to feel uneasy and afraid, so I began to yell and scream for my mom. This is the part of my story I really think I got PTSD from. My mom pops her head in the doorframe and asks me why I'm yelling and screaming for her, all the while this little girl is staring at me, still leaning up against the wall outside of the washroom. "Mom, it's Rachel. She's scaring me. I keep asking her things and she won't talk to me." And my mom says, "What? Rachel?" "Rachel is in Saskatchewan." "No, Mom, she's right there, standing beside you." My mom looks right at her, then back to me, and she says, "What are you talking about? There's no one there." I began to cry and tell her who I see. My mom says this is where she begins to feel uneasy, so she helps me off the toilet and helps me wash my hands. By the time we are done, the little girl is gone. I'll never forget that for as long as I live. This was in Minot AFB, North Dakota, where I was born. These events started when I was a little boy and in 2nd grade. Every night like clockwork, I would wake up in the middle of the night. Every now and then I get an urge to search to see if anyone had a similar occurrence, but I've not found anybody else who had a story similar to mine, with respect to the specific noise I would hear that precluded each of the events. I have told a number of people my story, and the best way I could ever describe it was mechanical, metallic, and high-pitched. Imagine the sound that movies and animes use whenever a sword or a blade is drawing quickly from its sheath. Now transpose that sound into the rhythmic pulsing cadence of a steam engine from an old train. I would wake up each night for some reason and would be in my bed just laying there either trying to get back to sleep or entertain myself until I got tired again. Sometimes I would just be playing with a toy like a matchbox car. All of a sudden, I would start hearing it. The sound would start very faint, distant, but distinct. Since we lived in a 2-story base housing and my bedroom was upstairs, I had always thought it was originating from downstairs in the basement, but I don't know. The sound would linearly grow and intensify as if it were drawing closer. There were pauses in between each pair of pulses. The noise would grow to become almost deafening, and then it would just stop abruptly and there was complete silence. I would always try and hide under my covers, clenching my eyes tightly, but I could hear something distinctly moving about my room, as if it was investigating or searching for something. I had a bunk bed. At first, I used to sleep on the bottom bunk, but when this routinely started happening, I moved up to the top bunk just to put more distance between me and the entity. Although I was young, my spatial awareness was good enough that I could reasonably approximate where it was in the room based on the direction the sounds were coming from. Occasionally, I would work up the courage to ever so slightly peek out of the bed, using the small gap in between the mattress and the wooden beam my father put between the headboard and the footboard to keep me from falling out of bed. What I saw was a tall figure, dark, with no distinguishing features. It would just be frozen in place facing the bed. I would pull the covers back down so I could hear it resume moving, and whenever I would peek back out, it would be in another location. The event always ended the same. All of a sudden I would become paralyzed in fear and clench my eyes tightly. Then I would feel the covers being pulled down and would then feel what seemed like hot breath on my neck, and would have amnesia about anything after that until I was awakened that morning. When this started happening, I asked my parents to give me our box fan to sleep with at night. I would set the fan right next to me and would wrap a blanket around it that would inflate to make some sort of fort before I went to sleep, providing me with a false sense of security. Sometimes when I would wake up in the middle of the night, the fort would be destroyed, and when I started to hear the noise, I would frantically try to build it back before the mysterious figure arrived. There were times that I wasn't fast enough and would just quickly pull the covers over me to hide. I told my parents, but of course they disregarded it as just the ramblings of a child scared of the dark, and I would eventually begin sneaking into the room at night, which actually worked for a while. That is until my father began getting mad, and to teach me a lesson, he would send me back to my room. I became very stealthy and memorized where every single creak in the floorboards were, and would sleep on the floor next to their bed. This worked for a while. That is until Dad found out and started locking the door. One night as I snuck out of my room, past the stairs and crossed the hallway, I reached their door only to find it closed. Suddenly I started to hear it. I was too afraid to move, and I didn't have anything to cover with. I was completely exposed. Frozen in fear, all I could do was close my eyes as tight as I could and wait. The noise grew and grew, stopped, and I felt that warm sensation on my neck, and then I fell unconscious. My mom found me the next morning in the middle of the floor, and I never tried to attempt to escape from my room again. Eventually, my mom, sister, and I moved from our home in North Dakota down to Florida to stay with my grandparents for a year while my dad stayed in Georgia to look for a job. The last night I saw the figure was that first night in Florida. We were all sleeping in the same room in our own beds, and I woke and heard the noise, then saw it standing over my mother. At first, I pulled the cover over my head, but in a final stand, I ripped it off to finally confront the entity that tormented me. The figure dissolved, and I have not seen it since, but to this day, at 28 years old, I absolutely cannot sleep unless I have a fan in the room. I have been told by people it was sleep paralysis. However, until those final moments when I had that feeling on my neck, I could move freely, so I really do not see it as that. I am really curious though. If any of you have ever experienced something similar, especially in regards to the sound it made, and that warm sensation followed by amnesia,